All right. All right. Strain theories. Where does crime come from? Okay, this is a criminology class. It's the idea that people are under pressure and that they hit a certain strain that results, from their life conditions, their environmental conditions, the lack of ability to succeed, lack of ability to gain access to the tools they need to be successful in their lives. And it's not an act out of like a violent sort of strain. That's not really what we're talking about here, at least with Merton's theory. But it's more of okay, I've got to make ends meet somehow, and they find a different path from the one that most people take. So let's follow up on this. All right. So we're going to talk about two types of strain. We're going to talk first about Robert Merton's mode of adaptation. This is the most famous one. And then Agnew's general theory of strain, which is also a pretty good one, which helps us explain some things that Merton couldn't explain. But we're going to start first with Merton, and this is the classic. So, excuse me. Merton was a sociologist, and he was studying, essentially, studying crime. And he's a follower of Durkheim. And he argued that anomie is results from two things. It's one thing involving two components. It results from the disconnect, or what he calls the disjuncture, between societal goals and societal means. Okay, so the goal is this over here, and the mean is this over here. And when you can combine the two together, you don't have crime. So when you have people if the goal is this and the means are available, then you have a match. But where strain happens is when the goal is here. Where am I? Up here. And the goal is up here. This is crazy. I can't find this camera. All right. The goals are here, but the means are down here. See that gap there where my little head is? That's where strain happens. So let's get a better example than that. We're not going to watch that video. If you want to watch it, it's fine. It's just a 1-minute clip it's called 1-minute strain theory. All right. So what are the goals in the United States? Let's just start with this argument. So his theory starts with the assumption is that the United States, as citizens, we have certain culturally prescribed goals that the vast majority, if not all of us, share. And so what are they? Well, there are things like, he argued that U.S. society is focused on material wealth and financial well-being. Okay, that's pretty solid argument, I think. It's clear that, we like material comfort in this country. The whole system of capitalism is about consumption. And the more goods we consume, the happier it's supposed to make us. And the better off our economy is. And we are bombarded with this message, right? We're all given the same message, what it means to be successful. So what are the markers of success in our society? A nice house, a fancy car to drive around, stylish clothes to wear. These are the marks. We call them status symbols. And what do? Well, they demonstrate to other people. They signal to other people that we are wealthy and successful people. We live a material life. It includes other things like, nice vacations, going out to fancy restaurants, the good life, okay? And Merton argues we all want it. And we're constantly bombarded by messages, especially through advertising, that we need it, So his theory is we can predict a person's behavior depending upon their relationship to cultural goals on one hand, like material wealth, and something else he calls institutionalized means. What are institutionalized means? Well, cultural goals are what people believe to be worthy of striving for, like material wealth, the good life, okay? Money, cars, vacations, nice big house, etc. Institutionalized means are society's accepted ways to reach these goals, okay? Society lays down rules for us. There is a proper way to achieve cultural goals of success. And that is, what are they? Well, you know what they are. It's hard work. It's, go to school, get a good education, get a job. All right? So the goals are material wealth, comfort, the good life. The institutionalized approved means are good education, good job. Where does crime come from? It comes from the strain. And the strain is, even if we share the goals, let's assume everybody wants the good life, not everyone has equal access to the institutionalized means. Because in order to get the good job, you got to have the good education. In order to get the good education, you got to have a good solid foundation of education at a lower level, right? At the elementary and at the middle school and at the high school level. You got to have parents who can afford to send you to college. You got to have parents who can afford to send you to the prep classes to take the SAT and the ACT, right? If you don't have these things, then chances are you're going to struggle in your ability to meet or have access to the institutionalized means, which means you're going to fail at getting the culturally approved goal. So these are the institutionalized means: schools, colleges, and one of the things you get out of this, out of going to college, that people tend to undervalue, it's not so much the degree in hand, it's the networks and contacts that you make. It's the professors who can write letters for you to get jobs, or can write letters for you to get employment, or most importantly, can write the letters to help you get a good internship. And it's those networks and contacts that you meet in these experiences that can help you get jobs later on in life once you graduate. Without access to these institutionalized means, the way things are done in terms of gaining access to getting that good job, to get that material wealth, you've got to have access to these institutionalized means, or you got to choose a different route. The disparity between goals and means can lead to strain or frustration. The greater the level of strain, the more likely a person will act out in a deviant way. Why is that? Because Merton argues that we all go through something called the modes of adaptation. This is the way that people react based upon their attitudes regarding the goals and the means. If they accept the goals and they accept the means, okay, then if they don't achieve success, they have nobody to blame but themselves, right? But not everybody accepts the goals. Not everybody accepts the means. People might accept the goals and reject the means. They might accept the goals, but they might accept the means, but reject the goals. Let's talk about this. So here are our modes of adaptation for Merton. The first is what he calls conformist people. And most of us, probably 70% or more of us, are easily classified as conformist. We are people who accept the goals, the good life, right? The culturally subscribed goal of the United States. You're supposed to want the good life. You're supposed to work hard, make a lot of money, buy the big house, the boat, the car, etc. And we also accept institutionalized means. We know there's a right way to do this. Go to school, get a good job, work hard at that job, get promoted, go into business for yourself, whatever it is. Okay? Get the skills you need to be successful at what you want to do in life. That's conformity. Okay, work hard at it. Here's a picture of happy, shiny conformist. Look at him, smiling, working hard, all dressed up, looking nice. These are conformists, right? Most of us are conformists. Do conformists commit crime? No, they don't commit the kind of crimes we're talking about. They don't commit index crimes. They don't commit property crimes, most of them. They don't commit violent crimes, most of them. The second, in terms of popularity, we're going down the list here. The second form of adaptation, according to Merton, are innovators. The innovators are the criminals. These are the most interesting people. They accept the goals. Oh yeah, you want the good life, right? They just reject the means. And they most likely, some reject the means because they're just not interested. They want to be professional criminals. So that's a small group. Most reject the means because they're not available to them. These are people who typically come from neighborhoods where they don't have access to good, solid educations. They may come from a broken home. They may come, they may have come from a family that has always been involved in trouble with the law. But for whatever reason, they reject the means. And so here's another picture. Here's some people. We got your crime family down here. This is the Soprano family, a mafia family, fictional mafia family. Got a little drug deal going on here. And you got a guy with the blunt and a big fat stack right here. So these are your innovators, okay? They are trying to achieve material success. There's the money, right? These guys, a mob always has money. These guys are making money. They're working their way up. It's just that they're not doing it the way that the conformists are. They're not, these guys aren't going to college and working their way up the corporate ladder, okay? Maybe it's because they didn't want to go that route. Maybe they couldn't afford to. Same with this guy here. These guys they chose a life of crime. We'll talk a little bit why people might choose this life over more conventional ways later when we talk about organized crime. But these are the innovators. These are the criminals. The vast majority of crimes we talk about in this class. They come from this group. All right. The third group are sad people. They're your ritualists. They're not a large portion of our population. They are a group that is at high risk of suicide. And who are ritualists? These are people who reject the goals, but still accept the means. I call these folks people going through the motions. These are people who are bitter and sad about life. And here you go. Make it stop. These are your ritualists. Do they look happy to be at work? No, they don't. They're there because they know that's what they have to do. But they've kind of given up on, being highly successful at anything. And they're just kind of going through the motions, waiting for death to come and take them away. A little harsh. Retreatists are people who reject. You can't see that because I think you got my handsome face down here in this little corner. So these are people who reject both the goals and the means. These are people who have retreated from society. And we get a decent amount of crime from this group as well. And not nearly as much as from the innovators, but we do get some. And who are these folks? These are people, drug addicts. You got a couple of people obviously strung out on heroin here, outlaw motorcycle gangs. These are people who've just kind of dropped out of society, kind of living by their own rules. So they don't accept the goals or the means. And what kind of crimes do they get involved with? Well, motorcycle gangs get involved with a number of crimes, but primarily crimes against the moral order. So retreatists are people who are just many of them are kind of struggling just to make enough money to live day to day, and they'll do it any way they can, whether it's selling drugs or selling their bodies or, petty crimes, etc. But that's typically their only outlet for income. And then lastly, we have rebellion. And this is kind of an interesting because rebellion also leads to some forms of crime. It leads to arrest. It leads to deviant behavior because rebels by nature are deviants, right? And so they're trying to do two things. They're both trying to change the cultural goals and also change the approved means of getting to the goals. They're trying to completely redo the system. And so we've seen a couple of these in our recent history. So one, go back 10 years, you can talk about the Occupy Wall Street movement. Okay, and so this was a globally active group that essentially attempted to, overthrow, not necessarily overthrow the capitalist system, but clearly restructure the capitalist system in a way that they considered to be more equitable in the rewards and how the money, who gets what and why. They wanted to significantly reduce income inequality in the United States. And then, of course, most recently, we've seen rebellion in terms of not just police brutality, but just in more generally about racism. And it's this, a story that unfortunately just keeps getting retold. I was a kid, very young kid, in 1968 when the Martin Luther King assassination led to serious riots all throughout the country, much worse than what we saw in the United States this summer of 2020. But every now and then, these kinds of issues keep coming up. And then so we saw the horrible murder of the George Floyd up in Minneapolis by that police officer. And we saw protesters, and then we saw police come out and the protesters, and then we saw some anarchists get mixed in with the protesters. But this sign, by any means necessary, what this guy is painting on this building here, is a slogan that Malcolm X used, who was a revolutionary in the 1960s. And basically, they want to change the system. So these are, rebellion is something every society has in some form or fashion. And ours currently is the issue of race and race relations and unequal treatment of African Americans, particularly by law enforcement, is a flashpoint. It has been and it continues to be, mainly because there hasn't been any progress made in this area. So Merton is not without his enemies. Let's talk about three things that people don't like about Merton's theory. Number one, it is a theory that focuses very highly on lower class crimes. It tends to focus almost exclusively on poor people. And his argument is that, well, they're poor, they were born poor, they don't have access to, good schools, and they come from broken homes, and he's not blaming them so much for that, but it kind of comes across a little bit as like, well, they kind of get what they deserve. And so people have pointed out that these aren't the only criminals in our society. There are crimes committed by middle and upper class people that Merton doesn't really talk about, and they don't fit his model of strain very well. Because what we'll see with corporate crime is these are people who bought into the means, right? And they're doing very well financially in their regular jobs, but then they take it, they keep pushing the envelope and they keep looking for opportunities to cheat. And this theory doesn't really explain that all that well. Second, it assumes that we all share the same goals of both institutionalized needs and cultural goals. In particular, we all share the goal that we have to be wealthy. And there are lots of people who are more content to be comfortable than wealthy and happy with the jobs they're doing. And they work common jobs, they live in modest homes, and they are very happy with their lives. In Merton's idea framework would say that, well, they can't be happy with their lives because they're not very financially successful, but they're not committing crimes. And lastly, so let's take a look at the neighborhoods where the innovators come from. They tend to be low income neighborhoods that are what we call socially disorganized. We'll talk about this here in the next chapter. But most people who live in those neighborhoods, over half of the people who live in those neighborhoods, have ever been arrested in their lives. And this theory cannot explain why people who come from those neighborhoods aren't criminals, when in fact, based on his model, they should all be innovators. All right, we're going to stop right here, and then we're going to talk about Agnew's theory in the next